Hey! Stop! Stop!
Well, it looks like Donkey Kong is not gonna give up on Mini Mario's, isn't he? And in fact, no matter what though, we still have to go after him, but this time we're now gonna be able to go into the Plus Worlds, starting with World 1 Plus.
Mamma mia! Here we go again.
Yes, here we go again indeed, Mario, because obviously the game itself is not exactly over yet. So, hey, what is up ladies and gentlemen, it is I am the one and only Starlight Glimmer here once again, and I am back for the likes of the Maxi Toys videos once again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for some more of Let's Play of Mario vs Donkey Kong as a remake for the Nintendo Switch. So, last time, we've essentially did manage to completely done everything for the sake of the forms of not only Mystic Forest, which appears to be in World 7, as well as World 8 by the forms of Twilight City, and as well as from that, we also did manage to able to take care of the forms of Final Boss number 1, that's what appears to be Donkey Kong himself, by simply able to free multicolored toads, and on top of that we did somehow manage to able to beat the likes of Donkey Kong in the process by simply utilizing the forms of the Big Barrel. So yeah, everything else will be come to expect. But as you can see, once you've beaten the game for the first time, specifically once you beat Donkey Kong for the first time as the actual final boss fashion, basically as you can see on the actual normal regular stages, and this also applies to those expert stages as well, as you can see there's actually a little circle on that particular level icon. This means about the fact that you've essentially unlocked the time attack mode. So because of that though, I should probably explain more details about the forms of the actual time attack mode of how that particular thing plays out to be, but we'll save that until whenever we finish up with the forms of every single stages of how this particular remake actually has to offer. So anyways though, and as well as from that, yes, just like before on the Game Boy Advance version, you were able to actually unlock the expert stages as well. However, this time around though, we have ourselves some additional new levels into the actual expert mode. So, but then again, we'll save expert mode for later, because today, for this video, as you probably already guessed, is about the fact that obviously we are now going to be able to go into the Plus Worlds, starting with World 1 Plus, which appears to be Mario Toy Factory, which is basically a sequel to Mario Toy Company since in the beginning portion of the game. And obviously, no matter what though, the main gimmick of the Plus Worlds this time around is about the fact that obviously, as you can see, that we need to able to guide one of those mini Marios at the end of this particular level. To be more specifically, as you can see, that mini Mario actually got a key. So obviously about the fact that we need to not only guide Mini Mario with a key, but also about the fact that you better have to make sure about the fact that you need to keep an eye on Mini Mario at all times, and in addition to that, you really don't want to let the Mini Marios get destroyed, because obviously if you let one of those Mini Marios get destroyed, it'd take your life away. So as a result though, these stages are for the most part pretty self-explanatory, but eventually it gets to, until when it gets to the point until likely in the later worlds, it gets a little bit more difficult. So as a result, yeah, that's the reason why that's a good thing we did somehow manage to go after some more extra lives before this is gonna happen. So as a result, as you can tell, that unlike the regular main worlds, that obviously there was no Mini Mario stage to be found, because obviously we can easily manage to rescue one of those Mini Marios in the regular stages by simply going from level 1 through 6, and eventually at some point we're able to face off against with Donkey Kong again, except the fact that we have to deal with him with a much more of a tricky stimulations. So yeah, everything else checks out there for the most part, especially because, again, if you already experienced the Game Boy Advance original, you know exactly how this sounds. Except the fact that, obviously, no matter what, though, depending on what worlds we go into in the Plus world, I believe the actual background decides to change a bit. So, for instance, about the fact that in Mario Toy Factory, obviously it does manage to take place inside the forms of Mario Toy Company as opposed to the outside. So, as a result, it's pretty, you know, pretty refreshing to boot. So, yeah, nothing else to say about that, I guess. Apart from the fact that, well, today's date is, of course, is the 9th of March today. In some cases, though, in 2024 today. There are quite a few stuff I would like to mention, though, which is especially noticeable because at this point in time, that's until tomorrow anyway, Happy Mario 10 Day is going to be happening until tomorrow, because obviously no matter what though, I'm still very curious to know of what's going to happen for the sake of the forms of the Happy Mario 10 Day at this point. So, everything else will be come to expect at this point. Also, I don't suppose if you noticed, but I do apologize for that background noise you're going to be hearing in the background, mainly because, for whatever reason, my door just keeps on rattling though, especially because no matter what though, despite the fact that we still have to cope with the forms of not only the few gusts of wind, but it's also about the fact that it can be pretty stormy sometimes. So that's very annoyingly consistent sometimes, but I'm sure I'll try and able to fix that at some point, especially because no matter what though, and it's also worth noting for, my bedroom door's shape is not exactly accurate with all that particular shape, because no matter what though, I'm pretty much more accustomed to the forms of how it does it in the old house, where basically though it's about the fact that that particular door just fits perfectly. So for whatever reason, in the forms of the actual specific room as we've on to right now, that we seem to have a lot of issues with the door recently, which I know is mainly because of its age, or perhaps even maybe because of how the fact that maybe it's pretty tricky to say about this, especially considering for the fact it's been a very long while since I actually mentioned something like this. So, and as far as I'm usually concerned, recently, that Pinkie Pie, she's obviously busy doing with the forms of a lot of baking stuff recently, because as far as what I've heard, that she's obviously going to be able to be working on not only banana with custard, but also with the forms of, presumably speaking, ice cream with strawberry jelly. So, as a result, I'm actually very looking forward to able to actually try those desserts out. Mind you, I've already experienced those desserts already. So, potentially speaking, I was about the fact that I'm just really looking forward to having those puddings again with Pinkie Pie yet again. Now, I'm sure that Pinkie Pie will also going to be inviting Trixie as well. Well, depends on specific scheduling about the fact of how this turns out. So, anyway, so we can able to expect to get some even more extra lives right here. So we can able to actually just to like, well, you know what I'm talking about. So, anyways though, so yeah, a few things we want to talk about in regards to the forms of what has been happening ever since in about a couple of days ago, as well as the forms of just recently. For what I found out is about the fact that it's been 10 years ago since this particular cartoon series called The Tom and Jerry Show, where basically the actual art style is completely different compared to the forms of how it does in the old school days. Well, what I've noticed is about the fact that that particular series has recently turned 10 years old just recently. Mind you, it's been a very long time since I actually known about this particular variation of this particular The Tom and Jerry Show from the likes of in 2014 for some time. Well, that's just mainly because I'm still more accustomed to the forms of the old school retro cartoons of Tom and Jerry, just because of that slapstick is very comedic, and on top of that, super nostalgic as well. Which, that's as far as I can usually try and able to explain about that. And in addition to that, is about the fact that also something's worth noting for is about the fact that it looks like that recently, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 has recently got a new update. Well, it usually happens during the forms of about a week ago, so as a result, Nickelodeon All-Star Brawl 2 has now recently reached its new update onto version 1.7. I think that's about it, basically. Yeah, just version 1.7. So, I would have liked able to mention about the forms of some patch notes they've somehow addressed, but I don't think I can probably do with that, honestly. So, oh yeah, and fun fact is about the fact that for those of you probably wondering about the forms of this Once Upon a Studio, that obviously that Disney did somehow release on Disney Plus ever since in 2023, which that was the best project for 100 Years of Wonder of Disney itself. Well, as it turns out, is about the fact that originally, though, they were expecting to able to actually get ourselves the entire full scenes of the forms that involves around with multitude of characters. Well, as it turns out, is that I found out one of those specific scenes is actually cut. Well, to be more specifically, that I found out there was actually some more deleted scenes of the forms of Once Upon a Studio. So, as a result, according to the forms of Disney TV and news, one of those scenes involves around Scar and Mushu, which could have been something, and one of them involves around the sheriff from Robin Hood helping Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and finally one of them is actually involves around Cogsworth and the 101 Dalmatians. So I'm not exactly sure why those scenes were cut entirely and just put it into the forms of one of those deleted scenes catalog. Well, I suppose no matter what though, maybe because of time constraints or something. Well, that seems to be the case or somewhat, but that's besides the point. Oh, and something's worth noting for, as you can tell, about the fact that since we're now going to be able to actually just able to, well, guide those mini Marios in the, with one of those locked doors this time, well, as it turns out, unlike the ones in the original version of the game, basically though, one mini Mario and one mini Mario did somehow reach onto the actual locked door, Mario did somehow say something like, "We did it, good job little guy." Well, as a result, as it turns out on the remake, unfortunately though, Mario can no longer set that particular line. So, it's also worth noting for the animation while going for the keyhole is actually a lot different this time. So instead of able to actually getting sucked up by the forms of the keyhole, unlike the original game, so instead, obviously Mini Mario enters the keyhole and then Mario enters the keyhole throughout. So, rather than just getting sucked up by the forms of that specific keyhole, which I will admit though, I really do miss the old days, presumably speaking. So, and it's also worth noting for is about the fact that if Mini Mario gets destroyed, unlike the original version of the game, where basically Mario just goes like, "Mamma Mia!" every time when Mini Mario gets destroyed, while you're able to lose a life. Well, unfortunately though, in the Switch remake, does not seem to be the case this time around. So, yeah, I could totally see why they did somehow removed quite a lot of audio for the sake of time. So, either way though, so as you can tell, we've somehow fully completed the forms of Mario Toy Factory. Well, at least for the most part anyway though, because just like the forms of how it does it on the main worlds, obviously we will be back for that specific world until in a later time, specifically for the time attack aspect, which as a result, that seems to be the case. So, anyway, so now let's move on to the next world, which appears to be World 2+, and it looks like we've gone back into Donkey Kong Jungle, except now it's Donkey Kong Jungle Plus. So, as a result, the entire objective remains the same, so obviously, no matter what though, we still need to try to keep an eye on with the forms of the Mini Mario at all times, and conveniently enough, since we actually got ourselves some tons of stars so far, so this means we did technically manage to unlock the majority of the forms of the first half of the forms of those specific expert stages, so exponentially we do need to unlock the second half of the forms of the expert stages eventually. So that'll be a part of a deal though, especially concerning for the fact that obviously no matter what though, I don't think it's possible we can able to actually finish this entire playthrough of this and during at some point just before Princess Peach Showtime is going to be releasing, for I've noticed. And speaking of which though, we've only got about 13 more days to go until Princess Peach Showtime is going to be releasing on the Nintendo Switch. So, and exponentially speaking though, for what I've heard, they're about to be able to be revealing not only for the final trailer, or should we say, the overview trailer of some kind, during at some point during the forms of Happy Mario 10 Day sometime, but it's also about the fact that maybe it's a possibility that we might able to get ourselves the playable demo of Princess Peach Showtime, just like what they did for Mario vs. Donkey Kong Remake, just around that time when the overview trailer shows up. So, yeah, I'm thinking that seems potential, but we shall wait and see what happens, especially concerning about the fact that, after all, that we actually got ourselves some pretty good progression so far, for the sake of the forms of Mario vs. Donkey Kong on the Switch Remake. So, generally speaking, that's all I could really say about that, I guess. So, anywho though, so it's also worth noting for as well that as it turns out about the fact that not only does Rocket League is actually getting the actual collaboration with Avatar, but this also applies for Fortnite as well. So generally speaking, I was about the fact that both Rocket League and Fortnite is actually going to be having a collaboration with Avatar: The Last Airbender. So yeah, kind of an interesting collaboration as far as this is concerned, despite the fact that I haven't exactly played both, not only Rocket League, but it's also with the forms of Fortnite as well, because there are so many Fortnites 24/7, like 24 hours a day, while doing with 7 days a week. So, at least as far as I'm usually concerned with that specific meaning for that. So, and also, something's worth noting for, what I've found out, with the most recent episodes of The Simpsons, what I've found out, despite the fact that those episodes has not been released just yet, for the likes of Disney Plus, until specifically during at some point in October sometime in this year, in 2024. One of those episodes in particular, called Lisa Gets an F1, stands for Formula 1. So, as a result, it's one of those episodes that involves around, like, I don't know, I'm not exactly sure how to explain about this, because I haven't exactly seen that episode, but I do know right from the get-go that obviously it does manage to bring a Mario reference, specifically Mario Kart. So, and it does manage to involve around, you know, Lisa that acts like as Mario, and eventually at some point that's when Homer comes into play, act out as Wario, and as a result they drive around onto Rainbow Road. It feels like a, almost like the actual specific point about the fact that it almost had the exact same inspiration for one of those Mario Kart scenes in Mario Kart or the Super Mario Bros. Movie or something. Well, exponentially speaking though, about the fact that Lisa gets an F1 was actually on episode 12 of the most recent season of season 35. So, yeah, that seems quite a lot for those seasons entirely. And it's also worth noting for as well, about the fact that also during around that time until tomorrow, the Oscar-winning nominations is going to take place tomorrow. So exponentially, I'm very curious to know of who exactly achieves the actual Oscar-winning nomination. And relatively speaking though, is about the fact that, well, oh yeah, there's something I want to mention about this as well. For those of you who lived in North America since and yesterday, yes indeed, Kung Fu Panda 4 has recently came out just recently in America. And let me tell you something, don't spoil the actual film for me please, because obviously I've not got a chance to see that film just yet, because it wasn't until later on, in Journey Films in March, in the UK version anyway, it's going to be releasing by the end of March. So exponentially, I'm still looking forward to able to see that particular film once that film comes out. So yeah, everything else will be come together for that point. So anyways, once again, we'll grab the key and we'll grab some more extra lives, and exponentially, we can able to reach the maximum amount of lives. To be more specifically, we somehow reached to 99 lives. So, just like the forms of how it does in the original game, where obviously 99 lives is the maximum you can reach up to. Whilst unlike the forms of how it does it in New Super Mario Bros. 2, including Super Mario 3D Land, as well as Super Mario 3D World, that basically though it's possible you can able to reach up to about a maximum of 1,110 lives, expecting about the fact that you're able to actually expect to come across into not 1, but 3 crown icons for your life counter. So, I bet that seems to be the case or somewhat. So, I will admit though right away, I apologize for my commentary is a little bit slightly sloppy at some points, but that's just mainly because, well, I was trying to able to mention about the forms of what announcements they'll do bring, for the sake of the forms of the Happy Mario 10 Day, but honestly though, that's as far as I can usually try and able to explain any of these things at the moment. So, I mean, relatively speaking though, it's about the fact that, after all, that, exponentially speaking though, also, did you know about the fact that it's been 8 years ago since Zootopia has recently came out, ever since in 2016, for the sake of one of those amazing Disney movies, and as a result, it's no wonder why about the fact that Zootopia 2 is about to happen. So because of that though, yeah, I'm actually a little bit more optimistic about the forms of the sequel to Zootopia, or Zootropolis for those of you who lived in the UK. Well, that's besides the point. So, anyway, there's also another thing I want to address something about this as well, It looks like no matter what though, with the most recent DreamWorks film at the time, which appears to be buddy films of Megamind versus the Doom Disintegrate, for what I've noticed about the fact that when it comes to the forms of the review scores of that particular film alone, for whatever reason, that's usually for the sake of the forms of not only fans, for audience, but also for critics as well, seem to believe about the fact that the sequel of Megamind was actually very lackluster, for what I've noticed from the actual reviews alone. Well, that's just mainly because about the fact that I think something tells me it might be feels a bit very similar to the forms of how it does it for that particular Spirit Untamed movie. Like, for instance, the graphics is nowhere near as nice compared to the forms of how it does in the original, and maybe it's probably because they somehow introduced into ourselves with the actual young sidekick or something like that. So I think that seems to be the case, although the good thing about this though, I probably should able to skip that particular Megamind versus the Doom Disintegrate movie, because what I've heard is actually very, very bad. Like, I noticed there was actually one of those examples in one of those websites where I found out that in IMDb website, they did somehow manage to receive the film as in 3.1 out of 10, meaning it's actually unbearable to watch. So, potentially speaking, maybe I'm also able to give the original film a chance, so just in case about the fact that I can totally see why that the first film is actually very underrated for the sake of the forms of the original Megamind. So, but either way, that particular topic can wait though, especially because as you can tell, we've somehow made our way to the end of Donkey Kong Jungle Plus. And fundamentally speaking though, is about the fact that we might have to watch out for those instant death spikes, so just in case if you dare touch the spikes, then obviously you have to redo the entire fight again. So, but either way, yeah, that's as far as I can usually say about the forms of today's topic at this point, guys, unfortunately. Because, potentially speaking, I was about the fact that maybe it's a possibility we can able to mention about more details of something Mario-related coming up, exponentially speaking now. But for now, let's go ahead and take care of Donkey Kong for, I think this is our, I don't know about you, probably the 11th time trying to beat Donkey Kong in this particular remake. And I believe something tells me we're about able to beat Donkey Kong for about approximately, if I'm assuming correctly, it was going to be roughly about, I don't know, 18 times or something like that, or perhaps even maybe 20. Well, I think I've sort of almost lost count right there, but either way, Donkey Kong Plus is completely done. Well, besides about the fact that we'll come back into that world until for later for the time attack mode. So, and I think suffice to say, we should probably save time attack mode for last, because something tells me about the fact that certain stages are going to be somewhat easy and then the others, whilst in some other stages when it comes to time attack mode, it'll be a lot more challenging, which might be especially noticeable with the forms of strict time limits, and on top of that, well, you see what I mean whenever we get to, like, sometime in April, or perhaps even maybe it's probably best on April in that regard. So, anyway though, so with that being said folks, is that we get the endings of this point right here. So join me next time for more of Let's Play of Mario vs Donkey Kong Remake for the Nintendo Switch. Is that we're going on to World 3 Plus, and as a result we're going into Fire Mountain Plus. So, just to see where it heads up. So, exponentially speaking though, nothing else to say. So I'll see you guys until tomorrow. Later, fellas.